Autobots, roll out. Welcome to another episode of the Truth in Art podcast series. I am your guide, Connor Fowler, joined by co-host Antoni.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's episode, we will be talking about Optimus Prime. No, actually, we're not. We're going to be talking about transformation. Now, we mean transformation in, I guess, the spiritual sense. But just to get a bit more detail, Antoni, what do you think transformation is? Or what does it mean to you?
Well, yes, I've been doing quite a lot of reading about transformation in different forms and in different aspects of life in the last couple of weeks. And I think the key thing that really strikes me is a transformation is not a gradual change, you know? And I was really struck by how I've come to think of transformation as a gradual change where you can look back at yourself, 5 years later, look back at yourself 5 years ago and then compare yourself to now and think, my goodness, I'm completely a different person. Right. And whilst that is a transformation, I'm really, really interested in the idea of transformation as being a metamorphosis,
right.
A really complete and total change while still retaining the original elements of something or of yourself.
So if I could maybe distill this a little bit, would you be comparing change and transformation? As in, if I could maybe elaborate a bit on that, when you were mentioning looking at yourself 5 years past, the only reason one looks at it as a transformation is because it was 5 years ago, and it seems like something totally different. But the point that you reach today is over change, not transformation. If I'm gathering,
I agree,
those elements, and I think I agree with you in that sense that transformation isn't incremental. If that's what you're saying. Yeah. I think it's more of like it's a radical thing, isn't it?
Yes. I think in essence, that's what it means. The fact that we've sort of come to think of transformation as an incremental change perhaps I'm starting to think it's disempowered us by misunderstanding or willfully not grasping that transformation is really out with the old, in with the new type of thing. I mean, it's quite difficult to pin down because we're not talking about a specific type of transformation, but the I'm really starting to see that there's something incredibly powerful in accepting that transformation means you are free to let go of whatever existed before.
It's true. So, if we were to distill the essence of what transformation is, it's almost like death, in a sense.
Yes, Pluto. It's very Platonic, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Which is what I was going to get at next, actually, was the sort of symbolic nature of what transformation is. Because if you look at the different energies attached to, let's say, verbs, if you will, it's like, transformation is something that you go through and you do. Change at the same time is also something you go through and you do, but it's got different energy attached to it.
Yeah. Change
is more like, let's say, a bored energy. It's like there's a certain non-excitement in my life, and switching
like
around
the sheets or
exactly
something.
And switching around the layout of my bedroom will give me a bit of new excitement. Well, transformation is like, well, let me burn the whole place down and then build a new house. And I think that's what we're trying to understand about transformation. And I think you're absolutely right about how the meaning of transformation has been sort of warped in how we view it in today's society, at least, because people do think of it as an incremental thing. And what I mean by people, I think actually in general, maybe people don't think of it as an incremental thing. It's the way, let's say specifically organizations, including governments, for example, they say, we got to transform this. We got to change the status quo. And then they're trying to turn this massive ship, which is an often used analogy in transformation within organizations, where they think, well, you can't turn the Titanic, right? So when they're looking at change of, their, let's say, their way of being, their culture.
Mm.
They think, well, if we just start at the bottom, change a few things there, and then transformation will sort of kick off.
Yeah.
When the truth is that's never going to happen, because it's a phoenix, right? It's got to
Yes,
rise from the
beautiful.
ashes.
That's such a beautiful image, and you're absolutely right. The way we understand transformation, I believe, has become diluted, and it's perfect that you mentioned the phoenix, I think, because it means the seeming total destruction of something in order for the new to grow out of the exact same something. Mm-hmm. So only the nature of it, its form has changed. And because when I think of the phoenix, I think the phoenix immolates itself, it burns, becomes ashes, and out of the ashes comes another creature, which is still the phoenix in another form, which is where metamorphosis comes from.
Right.
So it's really interesting because it definitely gives me a really profound feeling of excitement, because excitement also carries with it uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. I think, uncertainty is definitely in the same play group as transformation. You know, they go hand in hand. Because to truly transform, you really need to be uncertain. Because if you were certain, which is all power to you, you've got the gist of it, in the sense of, I'm certain that something good is going to come out of this, then I will go through the transformation.
Interesting.
But most of the time you're not certain, and that I will stick to that. I think most of the time, in order for transformation to be truly impactful, it's almost like you need to be uncertain, because if I may just wrap that up real fast, it's because overcoming the fear is part of that transformation, or it gives the transformation power.
Yes, I would term that as surrender.
Yes. Because
I think it is very possible to believe that something good is going to come out of the transformation. I think the uncertainty arises from what that's going to look like, because the transformation means you enter the cocoon as a grub, as a caterpillar, and you do not know in the state that you enter that cocoon what you look like when you come out. You have no understanding of what it is to be a butterfly until you are one, right?
That's true.
And I think that's true of any person or entity or organization that goes through transformation.
Yeah. I think the difference there, though, is that we as humans can resist that, while the grub can't. It just will do it.
I'm certain the grub tries to resist it. I have no doubt that,
you think, huh?
Because it keeps eating and eating and eating, consuming, let's say, until it literally gets to a point where it cannot consume anymore, and it becomes almost paralyzed by its own consumption, right? Its own intake. And that paralysis then leads to stage 2, which is the cocoon making or whatever, right? But they are generally cocoons, aren't they? But my point being that I think the transformation happens to you as an individual regardless of how much you resist. It's just that it's much more terrifying if you consciously resist.
Yeah.
Because things happen in the world that are outside, pardon me, that are outside our control, and those things that happen will transform us purely because we will be kicked out of our comfort.
Absolutely. It makes me think of stuff like, wars or natural disasters that kind of enforce transformation onto you because they change the environment around you.
Yes. And one of the things that this sort of studying of what a transformation means and approaches to it, one of the things I've noticed, or I've begun to suspect, is that if you just embrace the desire for the transformation, it's almost the most you need to do. because you can't really control it very much. It seems to me to be a process of letting go. And then you can try. You almost need to be light enough to lift.
Yeah. So you think? Do you think one can seek transformation?
Yes, I really do believe that. But the seeking is interesting. Actually, it's just brought this to mind. We were talking about Pluto, whose other name, of course, is Hades. But I was literally about to say, really, it's the process that Ereshkigal, his wife, goes through, which is she enters the underworld to see her husband, and in order to do that, who represents transformation. So in order to do that, she has to remove her jewelry, her clothing, and I think ultimately she has to remove her flesh or her skin. The idea being that you strip down to the absolute, if you excuse the pun, bare bones. Maybe that's where we get that from. And that is the seeking of the transformation. Beyond that point, it's not in your hands. You've actually brought yourself to the transformative moment or place. But it's what I see is that even in organizational theory, which I've been looking at, it's actually a process of letting go of the security blankets, of your baggage, whether you're an organization or an individual, which is, to my mind, no different. It's actually letting go of all that stuff that's been holding you back or down.
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like, well, us as individuals and also organizations, I guess, in that sense, are so attached to stability.
Yes.
That when anything sort of shakes that a little bit, that's when insecurities arise. That's when fear comes, right? Stability is what gives us power in that sense. But the beautiful thing is that nothing truly is stable. And that's where the seeking of transformation, I believe, comes from, is that it is the knowing that stability is not constant. It's not a constant thing.
Well, it's boring.
Well, it's also boring,
kind of death,
and that is a kind of death. But and that's interesting we actually mentioned that, because as I said before, transformation is a death energy, but it's a death into rebirth energy.
So perhaps that makes me think that perhaps the reason we see death as connected to transformation is because you have to get to that point of ennui, of being so bored, of being so stable that you feel you can't tell that you're alive anymore. Yes. Because everything, every day, imagine, I think it's Groundhog Day. Every day is exactly, the most stable system would be one where every single day and every single night was the same over and over again.
Absolutely.
So there'd be no risk, no surprise, no nothing. And that is not life. It's the antithesis of life. It's a type of hell.
Yeah, it's like, it's ultimate death, but it's almost like time death to a certain degree. Yeah. I think to give a bit of context, well, now that we're on the subject, because it's quite connected, what do you actually think death means? Because to myself, it's not the actual physical death of someone or something. You have an animal eating another one. It has killed that animal, and therefore the animal is dead. But death itself, or the meaning of death, to at least to my eyes, signifies something otherworldly than the actual leaving of the physical space.
Of course.
Because I'm sure you don't just die here. And in the sense of here's a way of putting it. Me 3 years ago is dead.
Yes.
Me yesterday is dead.
Yes.
There is only me now.
And
right?
In that case, death, based on that, I would interpret death as letting go of the past. The non-relevance of the past. In that sense.
And I think those experiences are transformative. Having a sort of, I guess, a grasp / understanding of death and death energy.
Yes, that's interesting. When you said earlier about do you only die here? I'm paraphrasing, but that led me immediately to think, well, is it possible to have a death experience in the spirit world or in another realm or another dimension? Because on one level you could say, well, death is only pertinent to the material reality.
Yes.
Because it's a process of the life energy leaving something and then decay of the physical substances left, which provides actually life for other beings, like insects and bacteria, whatever.
Yeah.
But the idea of it's essentially the withdrawal of the life force from a particular type of matter, whether it's a human being or a leaf or whatever. So that's on one level, the idea of death. Is there a notion of death in other realms? And that instantly makes me think about the relationship of, for example, Pluto as a planetary deity or as the representative of death and transformation, although I would argue he's actually the representative only of transformation because he rules the underworld, which means you've died usually to get there. So I would say that Saturn, who's considered ruling time, because what is death? Based on what we just said, death is letting go of the past, and the past is a time relative.
It's true. Well, death in that sense is the end of time for you. Well, because time doesn't end, right?
Well, if time ends, then there is no death.
Well, yeah,
right?
That's true.
It's no relative thing to measure it with.
Thing to measure it by. Yeah, exactly. And that's an interesting notion as well. It's kind of mind bending to try and get your head around it, because the only way that we can experience these transformative effects and these truly profound evolutionary movements within ourselves and as a society as a whole is because time passes. Yes. Right? Time passes, so we have a reference on when something occurred.
And that's beautiful.
And it is beautiful and necessary. It's incredibly necessary. But when you have, as you were saying before, this representation of the deity of transformation, if you will, can only function if the deity of time exists.
That's interesting. I'm not 100% sure of that, even though I understand why you say it, because there's that intimate connection between death, which we've just agreed is time-based. Like it's founded in time, and if there's no time, then how can something transform from one state to another? But then I think about the image of a cosmos that was not in existence and then was in existence. That can I would argue that is a total transformation.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely get you. Whether time was involved or not.
Yeah, because then even if you have a cosmos and then there's no cosmos, but I suppose someone might point out that, well, unlike the phoenix, at first there was not. There was not. And then through the mind, I'll put it this way, the mind of God, the desire of God, the instigation of the uncreated, the desire for something was created.
I see.
And so someone might say, well, that's not like a phoenix because it didn't, the cosmos didn't arise out of the previous destruction of something else.
Well,
if I might finish, because the idea of transformation, whether it's a phoenix or a caterpillar, or even an organization, or even a person, the thing that I've noticed they all have in common is that there's a continuity, even though there's a complete change. We're using the word change now. So, for example, the phoenix burns itself to ashes, and out of its own ashes arises let's say the next incarnation of itself. But that incarnation arises out of its ashes. So there's a sort of cycle there. And I would argue that all that is has arisen out of, I will use this phrase, the mind of God. And the mind of God could be used as the kind of connector between God, the mind of God, and the cosmos. It's the phoenix, the ashes, and the reincarnation.
I agree with you on some things, but I almost completely wholly disagree.
Fantastic.
And the reason because of that is because when you're talking about the created and the uncreated like that, you're not actually talking about transformation. What it is this different side of the same coin. It no longer becomes a transformation because it's like looking at your back, you know, in the sense of, well, the cosmic forces of the yin and yang, right? One doesn't transform the other. They exist they coexist to have creation, or they coexist for creation to exist.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So the concept rather of transformation exists within that existence and cannot exist outside of that existence.
Okay. Yeah.
So therefore,
your point.
So the uncreated, or rather the cosmic creation and existence appearing from the uncreated, is not a transformation.
Because all of them exist at the same time. Right?
It is
so there's not the destruction of one giving rise to the other.
It is the being of both, because the being of both exist.
Yes, I see your point. Right. That's absolutely right.
So that's my my spin on that.
So then, how would you answer that? That being, I'll just maybe restate the idea.
Refresh my memory.
Of, is material, I'm going to paraphrase, but is materiality an essential part of the ability to transform?
Interesting.
Because you're transforming state, and something has to be destroyed, right?
Right.
And can you, if you don't have something that is destroyed or destroyable, can it be transformed?
Yes. Now, the reason I say yes is because, again, we're using destroyed and this term of destruction as a material, or we're trying to understand it as a material thing. Now, the way you burn down a building, for example, or whatever you destroy, shatter a window, it changes its form in a material sense. So it's gone from a building to ash, right? Yeah. That's a transformative state. Even the natural cycles of our ecosystem do that. Is the fact that we have rain because of transformations that happened in the water, i.e. it evaporated. Is that a destructive force? And I would say yes, because again, it's changing state, right? And it's wholly changing state. Now, that is not something that is applied by us.
Can I interject? I want to argue for a moment, because in the example that you give of the water, the problem there is that you take, let's say, an ice cube, you heat it, it becomes steam, you capture the steam, it goes back to water. I can freeze that water, return it to the state of being an ice cube. Transformation, as I understand it, is there's no going back to what you were before, as in the case of the butterfly.
Right. So is there cyclical transformation, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get at. And maybe you're right, maybe there isn't. But I think we've discussed this before, previously, not on a podcast, but on some of our discussions where we talk about cycles. And I think cycles do play a role in that transformation.
They must.
But it's not a cycle, is it? It's a spiral. Because you return to the same point, or rather you return to the same latitude, if you will, but on a different plane. Yes. So it could be one lower or one higher. Yes. Depends on which way you go around the circle.
The spiral.
The spiral. Sorry, thanks for correcting me. So it depends on which way you go around the spiral. Now, is that transformation, even though we're at the same point but on a different plane? And I would say yes, because you've had your lesson, let's say, from the previous movement, and you've gone into a new state of being. Yet you're still relearning that thing, or you're moving closer to the center, the oneness of that spiral.
I would return to the original premise that transformation has a prerequisite, and the prerequisite is letting go. So if you've let go of so much that you then become a different person, you are transformed, unrecognizable, then you're not even living in the same reality anymore.
It's true.
So in that sense, I completely agree that it's a spiral, because I remember my mind being blown when I first learnt and realized, fully grasped, that unlike what I'd been taught and still gets taught in schools, that our solar system is essentially like a record player. Pardon me. A record player. Actually, we are spiraling through the cosmos, and the sun does not sit in exactly the same position each day. It's moving, and we're moving through the cosmos with it. And that brings the reality that every moment you're in a completely new place, right?
Yes.
As is the whole of creation. And that means that if you draw the power inside of you to let go, the true transformation, I guess, is that you become able to live in that new place in the cosmos every moment, because you're not dragging that baggage with you.
That's true. And one thing I'd like to mention, which you touched upon briefly, was that you're unrecognizable, right? But there is such thing as anima, right? The soul. We are to know that is eternal. So does it go through transformation, if you will, in that sense? Or are we here the ones that go through transformation, and then it becomes the anchor point to which we understand the spiral to be? If that makes sense.
I think it's a great question. From where I sit at the moment, of course the soul goes through transformations, because beings can become corrupted, human beings, and our soul is what makes us a human being.
Yep.
That I fundamentally believe that. I mean, the reason we look the way we look is because of the way our soul is formed. And it gives our material reality, our material body, the shape it has. So what happens to the soul is what's happening to us. The fact that we live in a material reality, I've come to see that is the true Phoenix experience. That in order, being material is not an experience that's just given to any entity in the cosmos. So the opportunity to have a physical, dense body like this allows your soul, or I'll speak for myself, allows my soul to really test its
matter.
I was going to say, well, its courage, its transformative abilities. It's sort of a strengthening exercise. I can't
Absolutely.
articulate it terribly well at the moment, but certainly, gosh, is it possible for your soul or for a soul to transform without having a human material experience? This as people say, this 3D experience or whatever. That is a question I don't know how to answer yet. I'm going to study that one.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Well, we're just about to wrap it up, I think. Any advice to anyone going through a transformative experience?
Gosh, well, the only thing that comes to my mind is have faith. You're being transformed because you let it happen. Conscious or not, it's what you want and need. And remember that the opposite of transformation is a kind of static death, a recurring dream that will eventually become a nightmare because nothing ever changes. So have faith and congratulations.
Yeah, you're doing it and you did it.
Yeah,
if you've gone through it. Well done. Yes.
And we're looking to catch up.
Yes. Well, everyone have a transformative day and we'll see you in the next episode.